we go. Yeah, pretty fancy. Welcome everyone to Tech Talks by the Collab Lab. So super excited for our speaker tonight, Ceora Ford. Just want to kind of talk a little bit about some logistics before we get started. So the talk is being recorded. It'll be posted to YouTube and it'll be available on our website, thecollablab.codes. There is live captioning available. So we have a live captioning service kind of hooked up to the Zoom call. It's sometimes hilariously wrong. So it's worth kind of turning it on, just to see how that goes. But sometimes people find that helpful, so it's there. And like everything we do at the Collab Lab, this meetup is governed by our code of conduct. So that's on our website as well. And you know, it's pretty standard, like a lot of groups use. So, but if you have questions about that, you can find that. And then, you know, if you're feeling generous, if you're one of the people, somebody who's already established in tech, or you know, want to support us in some way, the Collab Lab is a US-based nonprofit that we provide training to early career web developers on how to work on software teams. So we find that this is super helpful for people to, and they're like in kind of as they try to get their first job. It's something that's really hard to simulate when you're just studying by yourself, or even in a lot of boot camps. But we put people on teams and they work on a project over 8 weeks under the guidance of mentors, most of whom are professional web developers. And people, yeah, they say really good things about how that helps them in their kind of their job hunt. So we have a couple of past participants and mentors on the call. So yeah, anyway, the Tech Talks is sort of an extension of that community, and I'm really glad you all are here. Ceora Ford is, I'm going to stop sharing so you can take that over, Ceora. Okay. But Ceora Ford is a developer marketing coordinator at Code Sandbox. So it's like a developer advocate, and is here to talk to us about AWS. This is a topic that, whew, I mean, I wish I knew more about it.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
I saw your slides a second ago, no problem.
Okay.
We'll get that set up. All right.
Can you see them now?
I see just your slide and your cursor. Yep, perfect.
Perfect, okay, awesome.
Yeah, so AWS is a big topic, and it's something that even, you know, I've been in this field for a long time and I still don't have my head around all of it. I've worked with pieces of it. There's so much to it. So I'm really excited for your talk, Ceora, about how to kind of use it as an entryway to get into more full stack development for front-end people like myself. So take it away.
Awesome. So Andrew gave me a pretty great introduction. I really appreciate that. Just a little bit of background as far as like where I fall, as far as like what kind of technologies I work with, my background, what I've been trained in. I am currently working in developer advocacy, but prior to getting this role, I have worked with a bunch of different things in tech. I've jumped around in a lot of different sectors. And I found myself getting involved with AWS last year in March. So that's kind of my introduction to AWS. I do have some experience with front end. And as I learned AWS, as I started studying more about it, I eventually was able to study enough to get my certified cloud practitioner certification. Right? Yeah, that's the right way to say it. And going through the curriculum, learning more about AWS kind of introduced me as a person who was formerly trained in front-end development, introduced me to a lot of concepts that I think are aligned very well with back-end development, which in turn kind of leads me into full stack development. So I kind of want to talk about that and explain how that can be a way for anyone, especially front-end developers, front-end engineers, to get into full stack development. So getting started, I want to kind of talk about some of the expectations for what you'll learn and what you'll get from this talk. It is going to be a very what, why, and where kind of discussion. So I'll be talking a lot about what is backend development, what is AWS, why should you be interested in AWS, how do the two align, how do they tie together, AWS and backend development, in turn full stack development, and what parts of AWS you should learn to become more full stack. I won't really discuss how to build full stack applications using AWS. I will later on at the end of the presentation kind of point you to some resources that can help you to do that. We just don't have the time. And I'm kind of afraid of live coding as well. So we won't really get into how you'll be able to build those applications, full stack applications using AWS, but I'll kind of give you the tools to equip you with the knowledge to know what you should use, how you should use them, where you can find these tools, that kind of thing. So let's jump right into it. By first discussing that first question, what is backend development? I'm going to assume that most people here understand what front-end development is, but as a high-level definition, front-end development is basically building the parts of a website that the users interact with. So that's why it's kind of like the front of what a user works with when they're interacting with your application. So on the flip side, what is backend development? So right up top, I have a pretty dictionary kind of like definition of what backend development is. Backend development refers to the server side of an application and everything that communicates between a database and the browser. So in practice, what does this actually mean? What do backend developers actually work with? What do they actually do? I list 4 things, which is, again, a pretty high level, brief, concise explanation of some of the things a backend developer does. If you talk to an actual backend developer, there's much more that goes into it. But for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to discuss these 4 points. So they create secure and performant APIs that deliver data from databases. They build well-organized and optimized databases. They configure web servers to handle user requests and scale according to user needs. And they create programs using server-side languages. And these programs pretty much tie the top 3 together so that they'll be able to be in a pretty package to interact with the front end side of an application. So this basically what's happening here is a long line of communication. It's basically like if you pass a letter to one person and they pass it to the next person, until it gets to the destination. And even though that sounds like a pretty long process, it actually happens in seconds. So, a user is using the front end side of the website, and they may submit some sort of form or application or make a request to Google for some sort of information. And it goes through these different loops until it gets to the database that has information. And the database goes to the API, and the API goes back through the web server, and the web server hands it back to the front end so that the user gets whatever they're looking for. And again, like I said, it sounds like a really long process, but it happens very quickly within probably less than seconds. So now that we kind of have an idea of what backend development is, we can better kind of align and see where AWS fits in the picture. So again, we're going to start off like, what is AWS? High level explanation, textbook definition of what it is. This is actually straight from the AWS homepage. AWS, aka Amazon Web Services, offers reliable, scalable, and inexpensive cloud computing services, free to join, and you pay only for what you use. So there you see that phrase, inexpensive cloud computing services. What is cloud computing? This was a concept that I really struggled with when I first started learning about AWS. For some reason, it didn't just click in my head, and I think it was because I got pretty technical definitions. So I'm going to try to distill it down into a way that anybody can understand. So basically, cloud computing means that Amazon owns the servers, and we, the users, rent out space on the servers. And you pay as you go, and you pay for only what you use. So that's one of the great benefits, and I'm going to go into more detail about what cloud computing really means in this next slide. So again, I want to kind of drill into your minds. AWS owns the servers, and we rent them out. We rent out space on the servers. So these 3, not bullet points, but 3 statements kind of break down what that means for the user and why that's advantageous for users. So I want to kind of discuss what the flip side of cloud computing is, or working with AWS, and that would be having your own servers. Like, for instance, right now in my home, if I had a business and I had a robust website that had to store some sort of user data or some sort of information in that way, if I had my own servers, they would have to be somewhere in my home, in my basement probably. I would have to configure them properly to handle the requests of users, to handle how many users I have. I would have to make sure that the servers are in an optimal environment so that they're always working and they don't crash because of being damp or too warm and things like that. As you can probably tell, that can be pretty stressful and it can be kind of a hassle. And the point of renting out servers is that you leave all those things to AWS. You let Amazon handle maintaining the servers. And I'm going to read through some of these statements to kind of go into more detail with that. So they handle scaling. So if you have a sudden huge increase in users or increase in traffic, AWS automatically gives you the space that you need without any hassle or panic. Again, if you had your own servers in your own home or in your own business, if you had a huge sudden increase in users, what would probably happen is your servers would be overwhelmed and they would crash. And then you would have to purchase actual physical servers, move them into your home and configure them, and then make sure that they're all set up properly so that they could handle the increased amount of traffic after some downtime from crashing previously. Now, since AWS owns tons of servers in tons of different locations, you don't have to worry about these kind of things. You can kind of sleep easy knowing that if you somehow go viral overnight or something like that, it won't be a problem because AWS will be able to provide you with the space you need without any headache. Also on the flip side, if you have a lower traffic, AWS can also take away the servers that you're not using so that it's more financially advantageous for you. So you're not paying for what you're not using. So if I had 50 servers in my home and I only needed 5, that would be a problem because I would have to figure out a way to get rid of the extra 45 servers. But with AWS, they handle that for you. Next point is that they also maintain the servers. So I always like to think about with my computer, and servers are a kind of fancy computer that hosts things, but with my laptop, if I leave it on my bed or if I leave it under a pillow, it'll overheat and it gets warm, and that's not good. It, can drain the battery, those kinds of things. That's a part of maintaining my computer, right? I want to keep it in the right environment, in the right spot so that it, can have the most longevity. It kind of goes the same with servers. They need to be in the right environment. They need to have maintenance checks, and that can be time consuming and it can be resource draining. But with AWS, when you rent out servers from them, they handle these things for you. So you don't have to worry about making sure that they are in optimal condition. And then the last thing is that it kind of ties all these things together. They promise to keep your servers available and secure. So this kind of goes along with maintenance. They keep the data centers that they have worldwide very secure so that there's no chance of people breaking in and compromising your servers. And in turn, because they handle scaling, because they handle maintenance, there's less chance that your servers will crash and then your site or other resources will be unavailable. So to sum all this up and why this is beneficial for someone as a front-end developer who wants to cross into the full stack space and therefore learn backend, is that cloud computing takes some of the responsibility off of the backend developers. So in turn, it can make learning backend development a bit easier because there's less that you need to know. Now you don't need to know about scaling. You don't need to know about maintaining servers. You don't need to know about all these things because AWS handles these things for you. So we're going to move into this next sector of how AWS and backend align. Where do they fit in with each other? Now we know what AWS is, we know what cloud computing is, and we know what backend development is, and where's the alignment, where's the crossover. So the way it works in my mind is that there are pieces of the puzzle of backend that AWS fits in. So one of the things that we mentioned 4 things earlier that kind of on a high level makes up backend development. One of those things was configuring servers. And when we discussed cloud computing, we kind of went into how AWS handles this. And the parts that AWS doesn't handle, you can easily configure and customize using AWS's user interface on their like console. You can easily pick what kind of servers you need, how fast you need them to be, how often you need them to be available. Those things are easily configurable using AWS, their user console. And then another part of backend development is all about data, storing data, building databases, hosting databases. Again, AWS can help you handle these things. They can help you build databases. They have services. They have tons of services available for these kinds of things. They can be pricey, but they're there. So it's a great way to kind of explore this sector without having to, it provides a direct path to exploring this. And then building APIs. So again, AWS has tools. One of them that I like to use is AWS Amplify, which is specifically for front-end developers. I'll kind of get into this later, but since I just thought of it just now, I'll just explain a little bit. AWS takes away some of the confusion that you can run into when it comes to getting into building backend resources and things like that. Amplify is another layer on top of that that makes it even easier for front-end developers. It's built specifically for front-end developers to build backend resources. So building APIs, whether it's a REST API or a GraphQL API, is much easier using AWS. So as you can see, I hope I'm making this clear so far. AWS provides a way to learn backend concepts without the noise. So one of the problems that I find I confronted when I was first learning about even front-end development is that sometimes you don't know what to learn, you don't know how to learn it, you don't know where to learn it from. And that can kind of happen too when you have the front-end knowledge and you want to become a full-stack developer, but you don't know where to start with backend. AWS pretty much points you in the directions you should go because they cover a lot of back-end concepts. So one of the things I thought about was, like I mentioned earlier in my introduction, I did study for the AWS Cloud Practitioner exam, and I was able to get my certification somehow. And I looked at one of the overviews when I was preparing for this talk. There are tons of them out there. I'm not sure specifically what overview I looked at for this, but these are the 4 categories that the AWS Cloud Practitioner exam covers. They cover compute, storage, databases, including migration and data transfer, and security. And these are 4 things that backend developers deal with. So like I said, sometimes when you're learning something, you don't know where to start, you don't know where to go. But if you decided to study for the Cloud Practitioner exam, you already have 4 sectors of backend development that are clarified for you or pointed to, so you don't have to do all the searching and Googling and watching videos to figure these things out. So it's pretty much like AWS provides a pathway to learning backend. They provide a pathway for you to follow, which when I had this realization, it made me really happy because it meant that I didn't have to spend a ton of time researching or getting lost and falling down rabbit holes, because when you learn about AWS, or like if you decide to study for the Cloud Practitioner exam, it pretty much points you to where you need to go. It may not go in depth because a lot of it is centered on AWS, but it at least points you in the direction so you can follow those directions that they point you to. So where should you start? This is a very interesting question because I think Andrew mentioned this in his introduction. AWS is a very, very, very vast topic, and there's so much out there, and it can get overwhelming. If you log onto the console and you just look at the sheer number of services that AWS provides, it can get really scary. I don't recommend that you do that. Here's what I recommend that you do if you're looking to learn about backend development through AWS. I recommend that you start by learning the basics and study as if you were preparing for the CCP exam. I will mention some resources later, but there's tons of resources you can access that there's YouTube videos, there's tons of articles on platforms like Dev2 that can kind of point you to the knowledge that you need to know to be able to prepare for the CCP exam. And the reason why I say study as if you're preparing for the CCP exam is because it covers the perfect amount of depth that you need to be prepared to learn backend. Because like I said, there's so many AWS services out there. If you just willy-nilly decide to study AWS, there's like so much out there that it'll get overwhelming. So if you study as if you're preparing for the CCP exam, it's like the perfect amount of depth that you need to get into backend development. And then learn the parts of backend that AWS doesn't really cover. So AWS covers anything that has to do with servers, anything that has to do with databases and API building. But you still have the server-side language side of things. You still have learning about SQL, which has to do with querying data, and learning about how to build REST APIs and GraphQL APIs. I find that when you do those things through AWS, they take a lot of work out of it, which can be great if you're trying to get up and running with building APIs, but you still need some foundational knowledge to really know what's going on. So I would still recommend to learn more about REST APIs and GraphQL APIs and like what's the difference between the two. And then once you kind of have these 2 things covered, which may take some time, but you can do it, I'm sure, I believe in you. Once you have these 2 things covered, the next thing I would recommend is building full stack apps using AWS. Like I mentioned earlier, this could get kind of tricky because I found that sometimes it's hard to figure out how to put all the pieces together. But one service, I guess it's a service. I don't know the formal name for what you would really call this, but one thing that AWS offers that can make this part, building the full stack apps, make this part easier, I should say, because it's not easy, but make it easier, is AWS Amplify. They have pretty good documentation, in my opinion. They have a Discord server as well, so that if you are confused about any steps along the way, you can talk to some of their developer advocates and other people in the community who can kind of help you get through that. So yeah, AWS Amplify is a good part to remember once you're on this third step of building full stack apps, because it can really help make the process a bit easier for you. So I've been referencing this throughout the whole presentation, and I'm finally going to get to talk about it. These are some of the learning resources that I would recommend that I've gone through that really helped me kind of make learning this a bit easier. The top thing I will say that I think, if you could ignore the rest, but this is the thing that I think you should do out of everything, if you're serious about like becoming full stack through AWS, is watching this workshop that Ali, I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, Spitel, I think. Ali, I'll just call her Ali. Ali did a workshop through Pluralsight maybe last week or the week before, very recently, and I happened to come across it, and I think it's great. This talk covers the what and the why and the where. Her presentation, her workshop covers how. She literally walks you through how you can build full stack apps using AWS and AWS Amplify. So I think that if you want like a real world example of how this is done, that's the perfect resource. It's a video on YouTube. It's available on YouTube, and it's literally titled Backend Development for Frontend Developers. I recommend that you search that up and work through that. It's about 2 hours long, so it won't take up too much of your time. And maybe you can break it up into 30-minute chunks to make it a little bit easier to digest, because she does cover a lot of information, but I think it's a worthwhile investment of your time. And then here are some of the other things that I've gone through or that I've used that kind of helped me out making this journey to full stack easier. The Cloud Newbies community is great. You should Google it. It should pop up if you Google it. If you decide not to, that's totally fine too, because I do plan on putting all these things in a thread on Twitter after this talk is over, so that all the links can just be there for you. But yes, the Cloud Newbies community is great. I go there all the time when I have questions about AWS, because it is a very vast and deep subject or sector of technology that can get easy to get confused with. So I definitely think it's great to have a community around you that can help you with any of the issues that you might run into. So the Cloud Newbies community is a Discord community, is great to be a part of. While I was studying for my AWS Cloud Practitioner exam, I used a Cloud Guru, which I think is one of the best resources out there. It does cost money, but it basically broke down the whole exam for me. And again, it'll break down some of those back-end concepts that you can explore further separate from AWS, but it helps you see what that path is and points to that path for you to make the journey easier. And then the AWS white papers, I typically am not a fan of using resources like this. I'm very I don't like reading just black and white text. I usually like to have a video or a fancy article or something like that. But I actually did read the white papers and I took notes on them. And I feel like this was very valuable in me understanding some of those core AWS and backend concepts. So I definitely recommend that you Google those and you work through those. And then the last two can help with some of the backend concepts that aren't necessarily covered by AWS. So learning the server-side languages like Python or Java or even JavaScript, and then learning SQL or a query language. Egghead.io is how I did those things. I learned Python or got the foundations of Python and SQL through Egghead.io. I would 100% recommend. I believe the courses I took were free, even though they do have paid courses, but the ones I'm talking about, I believe, are free. And then Code Academy is another one. I also went through their Python curriculum. Highly, highly recommend. Python was the scripting language that I decided to choose. Like I said, you could do Java, you could do JavaScript/Node and all that kind of stuff too. There's so many server-side languages, you can just Google a bunch of them and choose which one you think fits your needs the most. But yes, I use Codecamp Academy for Python, and I do think that they have a SQL course as well. So that's it for learning resources. I tried to keep it short because I don't want you to get overwhelmed by the amount of resources out there. So let's wrap everything up. This is the last slide, so you don't have to listen to me anymore after this is over. So in conclusion, what I want you to walk away knowing is that AWS provides the roadmap to full stack for you to follow. Let me say that again. AWS provides the roadmap to full stack for you to follow, which is very, very valuable. So first thing, backend in AWS, you can learn about AWS and fill in the blanks that AWS doesn't cover. So we kind of covered that in this presentation. The next step for you to do is to build with your newfound knowledge of backend development in AWS. You can start building these full stack apps so you can apply the knowledge that you've gained thus far using services that AWS has to offer. One of the ones I mentioned in particular is AWS Amplify, which kind of further takes away the searching and the learning that you have to do because they wrap everything up into one suite for you to learn and build with. And then this is an extra step that you technically don't have to do, but I think that sharing your knowledge with others is a great, great way to help others learn and to help you solidify what you have learned. So you can do something like this. You can give a talk about an application that you built using AWS, or you can write an article about a problem that you solved using AWS and backend concepts. Basically, any way that you can pass the knowledge on so that you can share with others and help others to learn as well and help yourself to learn the information even better. So that is all I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. You can find me thereafter on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. My username is @Ceoreo. That's CEEOREO_. And I will be posting a thread of the resources that I mentioned in the previous slide so that you can have all the links in one place. So yes, I hope that you all enjoyed. I don't know, are we going to take questions? Because I can answer some questions if people have any.
Yeah, there's been quite a bit of just kind of chatter in the chat and a few questions in there.
Okay, cool. Let me,
so,
can I, if I stop sharing my screen, maybe I'll be able to see.
Yeah, that might be easier, yeah.
Okay, there we go. Let me check the chat.
Yeah, I guess we could go back to the beginning and see if there's anything. And if you asked a question in the chat, feel free to just kind of put your hand up and unmute and ask directly too.
Okay, I think I'm going to start from the bottom.
Yeah, sure.
What are the blanks that AWS doesn't cover? So I very briefly touched on this, but one of the things that I feel like AWS doesn't cover are server-side languages and SQL. So there are a bunch of server-side languages that are popular in the back-end world. One of the ones I mentioned was Python. That's the one that's my favorite. That's the one I know. There's Java. There's so many. But AWS doesn't necessarily make up for that. They don't necessarily fill in the blanks as far as that's concerned. So I would definitely recommend that you learn a server-side language and then also learn SQL in addition to that. And then do extra research on building APIs, because you can build APIs using AWS, but they take a lot of the steps out of it. So you may not really know what's going on in the background. That's why I would recommend delving more into building APIs on your own time. Okay. Cool, someone's studying for their cloud practitioner cert. I hope it goes well for you. Hold on. How valuable are the certifications for different in your job search? I don't know if I can really answer that question because the job I'm doing now doesn't really have much to do with cloud development. But I do think that if you are looking for a cloud engineering job or a full stack job or a back-end job, it can really help prove that you know what you're doing. I hate to say that because certifications shouldn't be that way, but because of the AWS in particular certifications are so rigorous and you really have to study hard and have like applied knowledge, I do think that having a certification in those instances, especially if AWS is like listed as something you need to know, it's like proof to your employer that you kind of know what you're doing. Yes, Allie is great. I love her. Let's see. I'm still looking for, I find a lot with each other in terms of applicant. Yes. What you use for your particular application, any resources. I feel like Amplify might be able to help you with this. That was one thing I struggled with because AWS is very vast and there's a lot going on there. But I do think that if you look into some of the Amplify resources out there, they can kind of point you in the direction that can like narrow down your focus a little bit. And also, if you watch Allie's workshop, that's like a great place to start because she literally walks you through building a full stack application using Amplify. I'm still making my way through.
I want to add to that too, is like if whatever language you're most comfortable with is probably the place to start because every language has some kind of application framework. So, if you're familiar with JavaScript, there's Node and like Express is a good server to try. Rails, if you're a Ruby person, Ruby on Rails, they all have a framework, and AWS provides the machines to run it on. So, yeah, anything you already know is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Okay, I just saw someone said their only concern with AWS is accidentally racking up charges. This is a very legitimate concern. I probably should have addressed this in my presentation, but I do have an article just about this very subject because I actually had a nightmare where I almost got charged like $200 at a time where I didn't have any money. So that was very scary. And I just heard about on Twitter someone who, a student who was learning, who racked up like a huge AWS bill, and unfortunately, for some reason, wasn't able to get it waived immediately. And I have an article that I wrote about this very topic because I don't want anyone going through that because AWS doesn't make it very easy to like not make this happen. So I'm going to leave the link to this article in the chat, and it's basically it's a tutorial on how to create billing alarms. I recommend if you decide to learn AWS, this is the first thing you should do before you like spin up a server or anything like that. Go through this article, set up your billing alarm so that if you get charged over whatever your threshold is, mine is $0. If you get charged anything over that, they'll send you an email like, hey, you're on your way to being charged. And then you can shut down whatever it is that's like racking up your bill. So yes, please make sure that like that's the first thing that you do is to set up your billing alarms. And then my number one rule is that once you play around with AWS and you spin something up, you spin up a server or whatever, shut it off immediately. And then you should have your billing alarms in the background as like a safety net just in case that you forget to do that. Okay, now I lost my place with the questions.
Google Cloud Services they have limits over. If you go over certain limits, then they start charging you. Is it similar on AWS, or is it like you're charged from the first minute?
You're not charged from the first. It depends on the service too. That's another thing. So some services are free up to a certain threshold. Like I believe with like AWS Lambda, after like a very high number of requests is when you start getting charged. But that's not the case for all the services, which I didn't know. So I created a server instance. That's what got me charged, and it wasn't the basic server instance that's like free. It was one of the fancy ones, which I didn't know. And I left it on. And that was one that was very expensive because of the amount of availability and all the configuration and all that kind of stuff that I didn't know what I was doing because I was a beginner at the time. And they were going to charge me. So yeah, but there is like a whole, I think this is covered in the AWS white papers, how the pricing works for AWS. And it's a little complicated because it's not the same for everything. So yeah, AWS is out there to get your money. But yeah, I definitely recommend setting up billing alarms just in case, because nobody wants to be charged like any money, but especially like a lot of money, like $200 is a lot of money. And I've heard people almost getting charged like $1,000, $8,000, $500, things like that. And nobody wants that. Yeah, I think I went through, did I go through all the, I think I went through all the questions. Is anybody, did I miss any?
There's some newer ones. So Sahil
Oh,
had
okay.
a really good question about how does AWS EC2 determine how to scale up and down? Is it based on connections, memory, something else?
It depends. I hate to say that. I hate the answer to questions, but one of the ways that they determine how to scale up or down is depending on the traffic to your site, or it depends on the resource that they're scaling up and down. But one of the ways is that is the traffic. So if, for instance, if you have a website that you're selling candles and all of a sudden someone shared your website on Twitter and it got 1 million likes. And so you get a bunch of sales overnight and you get a bunch of traffic. That's one of the ways that they would scale up, is give you more space on your, or I think an even better example is if you have some sort of website where you have users who create accounts and you have to store their information, which is the case with the Canva website too. I'm like thinking out loud right now, but yes, in that instance, they would, because you have higher traffic, because you have more people who are inputting their credit card information, creating accounts and things like that, they would provision you with more space on their servers because you're getting more traffic and users and all that kind of stuff. So that's one instance. I'm sure there's more that I can't think of right now, because there's different ways that you can scale up and scale down, but I can't think of them.
Yeah. That's the thing. It's all configurable. So you can tell it, that's like if you have a certain number of requests coming in per minute, or if it's memory saturation on the server, they could bump you up to bigger instance, and you have control over all those things. But it's not easy to know which thing to choose. And I don't know if AWS, like in this training you search or something, they give you some guidance on how to scale based on different things.
That's one of the things they talk about if you're studying for the cloud practitioner exam, and that's one of the things they'll ask you about on the exam as well. But any YouTube video, Udemy course, or if you decide to go with a cloud guru, they will cover those things, like when you should scale, what you should scale, how you should scale, those kind of things, like what resources should you be trying to scale, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Lyle asked a question: what's the shortest path for a new front-end dev? Like I just ran Create React App to get their assets hosted on AWS.
So if it is a static application, meaning there's not like, how do I explain this? I can't think right now. If it's a static application, the best way to like get your like website hosted is probably S3. I haven't hosted a website on S3. Well, yes, I did. I had to do that as part of one of the courses I took. But yes, if you have a static website, the best way to do that is through AWS S3, because it's basically, you're just like dropping they call them buckets. You're dropping all your assets into a bucket, and it's pretty straightforward. That's probably if you're learning AWS, probably one of the first things you'll learn how to do, because it is one of the easier things. I hate to use that term, but it's one of the easier, less complicated things to learn how to do with AWS.
Yeah, I think it's the first AWS service that I actually used.
Yeah. And usually, like, even if I think, oh my goodness, one project I worked on was creating a should I talk about this? I don't want to tell like a long story because I can get pretty long-winded, but was creating a Twitter bot that was supposed to post pictures onto Twitter of dogs from a dog picture API. And one of the things you have to do is you have to drop the pictures. You have to drop the pictures you have to host them somewhere. And because pictures are static assets, you can drop them into an S3 bucket and they'll be hosted there. So that's one example of how you can use S3. I don't know if that's useful to anybody, but I just thought about that just now. Any other questions? Did I miss any more questions?
I don't know, kind of jumped around a little bit. So if anybody had a question that didn't get asked, then please feel free to unmute and ask. Or if you have other questions that haven't been put in the chat yet.
Every time I like pan away from the screen, it like jumps back down to the bottom of the chat box thingy. So I'm like, not sure if I'm missing anything or not. I hope I'm not though. And also, if you do have more questions, feel free to ask me on Twitter and I will try to answer them. again, AWS is, I feel like I might have oversimplified. AWS is a very vast like topic. So I may not have the answers, but I can at least point you to the right people or the right resources to get you the answers you need. Okay, what do you think was the hardest part for you to understand since learning about AWS? Very good question. For me, the hardest thing was that one part of cloud computing, yes, and when you're dealing with servers is that you have a lot of it has to do with like networking. And I had a really hard time visualizing how these things were set up in my mind. Like, I'm like, what is a network and what is this? And what, I just couldn't in my mind literally visualize what was happening. And that made it very hard for me to like figure out what was going on and to really understand what was being talked about. And it wasn't until I joined a study group with someone who's like an AWS expert. And I literally just asked him like, what is happening here? And he broke down some of those like networking concepts that are going on in the background. And once he did that, it literally was like an aha moment. Like, and I'm not going to get into them now because I could literally talk about networking for hours. But that's one of the things that was really, really hard for me. I'm a very visual learner. So a lot of these, like, some of these concepts are very abstract. And it was hard for me to see what was going on. But once he broke it down and I literally pulled out like a pen and paper and started like drawing things out, that helped me figure out what was happening. And honestly, I feel like everything with AWS is hard. And it doesn't help that the AWS docs are not the greatest. They're not the easiest. Amplified docs are good, but AWS itself, the docs are not the greatest. But that was one of the things that was really hard. But I feel like it had an easy solution. It was just that I had to delve more deeply into what networking really was. And then I think a couple more. What classes did you take since you mentioned you took classes for studying? Okay, so there was a few things I did for that. Number one, and the reason why I actually got into AWS in the first place, because I came from a place where I did not even know what cloud computing was, like no clue. The reason why I decided to learn about it was because in March of 2020, I received a scholarship from Udacity for their cloud DevOps program. So I was like, I don't know what cloud computing is. I don't know what DevOps is, but like I got this free scholarship, so I might as well learn about it. And that was how I got into it. And then I also, I also started taking the thing that really, really helped me with AWS, because the Udacity course was more so about like cloud computing in general and DevOps in general, but learning about AWS specifically was a cloud guru really helped me a lot. Again, both of these things are paid. I do think Udacity pretty often has scholarships. So keep out, if you sign up for their email notifications, they will let you know when they have free courses. And then there are also a bunch of like $10 courses on Udemy that I've heard are great. I can link those on Twitter as well if somebody wants recommendations that I've gotten for like Udemy courses that talk about AWS that can make it a little bit easier. But the funny thing about a cloud guru is this is why I talk about it so much, because it's actually really effective. I scheduled my CCP exam without actually preparing for it because I wanted to force myself to study for it. But the thing was, I forgot. And like literally like 4 hours before the exam started, I was like, oh my God, I have to take my exam today. And I totally forgot about it. And they don't allow you to cancel like the day of. You have to cancel like the date, like 24 hours, at least 24 hours at a time. So like 4 hours before the exam starts, I'm like, oh my God, I can't cancel. Like I have to take this exam. I logged into a cloud guru and like I put the videos on like 2 times speed so I could watch them really quickly. And I just went through them and like was scribbling out notes to just like get my thoughts on paper. And somehow that was enough for me to pass. So that's why I talk about a cloud guru so much, because it works. They tell you exactly what you need to know to pass the test. So yes, if you can sacrifice the price, because I think it can get pretty pricey, but they do have some free courses too. But if you don't mind like making that kind of financial investment, then I definitely recommend a cloud guru. And am I missing any more questions? I lost my place again.
Yeah, there've been a couple.
Yes, thank you for the. I'm gonna take this this networking resource too, because I love learning about networking. It's like one of my favorite favorite topics to talk about and learn about now. Yeah, okay. I think that's it for questions. Yeah, I think so. I think I got you all.
Cool. Any last minute things? Give people one last chance to throw something out there. I appreciate your time, Ceora, and this was great. I mean, I learned something, and hope we all found it useful. Yeah, definitely follow Ceora on Twitter. That's where I think you spend most of your time, from what I've seen.
Too much time.
I know, that's relatable. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone being here, and we'll see you back here for the next Tech Talk.
Thanks for coming. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And if you have any questions after, hit me up on Twitter and I will try my best to answer.
Yeah, great. All right, take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.